Hello and welcome to another interesting section related to the CIA review course where we are going to be discussing the issue related to sampling. So first, let's start. Why sampling is important? Because we can do testing of 100% of the population. And why is that? Because of the time, because of the cost, because of the efforts. So what are the important questions that we need to ask at the beginning of sampling? The first one, how many to examine? We have the population is 10,000. Are we going to take 5,000? Are we going to take 1,000? Are we going to take 500? Are we going to take 10? We need to understand how much is the sample size should be. And what items to select. If you have these 10,000 invoices, which of these invoices we need to select to be able to do the best testing we can? And finally, how to evaluate the results. What if out of these 10,000 invoices you select 50 invoices and 2 of them we have issues? They are not correct, they are not processed in the right way, they are not paid. What are you going to do? Are you going to say that actually the invoicing process is not working or it's working? These are the most important questions we need to address. So first, let's understand what are the 2 ways for us to do sampling. The first one called statistical sampling. Statistical sampling is the use of statistical method for me to be able to obtain the sample, to assess the sample, and to come up with a conclusion. When do I use statistical sampling? If I don't have actual understanding where are the mistakes or error or weaknesses in the internal control or the transactions that I'm testing. If I know exactly from experience, from understanding of the operation, that most likely this individual is doing the mistakes, most likely it's happening during this time period, most likely it's happening by this division. In that way, rather than using statistical sampling, I use non-statistical sampling and I select the items that I believe most likely they will have the issues, and immediately I will address the concern that we have inside the organization. So let's start with the principles. What is one of the most important principles? It's called representative sample. So you can see here the sample we selected is actually representative of the population. It's considering all the blues, considering all the reds, considering all the greens, and the sample is representing of how the population is distributed. So we say 2 things that can cause the sample not to be representative. The first one, we call it sampling risk, and the second one, we call it what? Non-sampling risk. And this is what we call it audit risk. Audit risk is the internal auditor coming up with a conclusion that's not correct. So they say audit risk is the risk of reaching invalid conclusion based on the audit work. The sample is not representing the population, or the internal auditor selected the right sample but he did the wrong testing. So for that, audit risk can be happening because of 2 things. The first one, of sampling risk. The second one, non-sampling risk. So let's understand the risk of the auditor when he is doing the testing. So look at that. We believe there is a sand, and this sand can enter inside our organization, can enter inside our warehouse, can enter inside our water tank. So if this sand is going to enter inside our water tank, the first thing we need to understand that this sand is representing the inherent risk, the risk that exists in the nature where we are operating, where we have our factory. So if this sand existing, we need to be able to reduce this inherent risk. How can we reduce it? By ensuring that we have controls, we have filters. So if the sand is trying to enter, we will be able to filter the sand and prevent the sand from entering. However, because we have that control, which is the filter, we have something called control risk. So what is control risk? Control risk is that this filter is not working effectively in preventing the sand from entering our water, from entering our factory. So we discussed we have inherent risk is the risk of sand entering, and we have the control risk is the failure of the control in preventing the sand from entering. This is why we bring an inspector, an auditor. Every time, every month, he is coming and checking the warehouse, checking the water tank to ensure there is no sand. He's selecting sample of the water and he's trying to see if we have sand inside the water or not. Internal auditors, they represent the final 3rd line of defense to ensure that actually there's no sand. But if the auditor selected the wrong sample, or if the auditor selected the right sample where they have sand in it, but they did the wrong testing, or he used the wrong tool, he will say, yes, there's no sand. So even the sand exists in the air, and the internal control, which is the filter, didn't prevent sand from entering, and the sand was selected by the sample of the auditor. Auditor came up with a conclusion that there is no sand. This is what we call it the audit risk. That the auditor came up with a conclusion that everything is actually fine, where in reality it is not. So let's see why this will happen. The first thing is called sampling risk. So you can see here the population. And you can see that the auditor selected a sample out of the population. But this sample that the auditor selected is actually not representative of the population. And why is that? Because the auditor maybe selected a small sample. Maybe because the auditor didn't understand how to select the sample in the right way. So this is why we say, for us to be able to make sure that this will not happen inside the sample that you select, you need to do two things. First, maybe you need to adjust the sample size. Maybe you need to take a larger sample. Or maybe you need to use more appropriate method in selecting the sample. Maybe you need to do it randomly. The conclusion that the auditor will reach is based on this. Let's say we are speaking about the operation. Let's say the deviation rate exceeds the tolerable rate. So the deviation is more than the acceptable rate. And the auditor said that the deviation is more than the acceptable rate. He's saying the control is not working. This is exactly the correct decision. However, if actually the deviation rate is more than the acceptable rate, and the auditor, he said the deviation rate is less than the acceptable rate, he didn't see that the internal controls are not working, and he said internal controls are okay, auditor made incorrect decision. On the other hand, if the deviation rate is less than the acceptable rate, so everything is okay. However, auditor concluded that actually the deviation rate is more than the acceptable rate. This is, we call it incorrect decision. Auditor did a mistake, something went wrong. However, if the deviation rate is less than the acceptable rate, and the internal auditor, he said, yes, the deviation rate less than the acceptable rate, internal controls are working as they should, this is what we say, internal auditor, they make the correct decision. So internal auditors can make incorrect decisions and correct decisions based on their selection of the sample and based on their testing. So the second thing, we say non-sampling risk. Non-sampling risk is not related to the sampling method that the auditor selected. You can see, auditor here selected the right sample, and this sample is actually representative of the population. However, when we looked at something very important, and which is what? At the end, we looked at the conclusion. The conclusion of the auditor based on this sample said that actually this sample that he selected is actually alright. All of them are red. Even he selected blue, green, and red. He said that all of them are red. And this is where we go and see he selected the right sample, but he did the wrong testing. And because he did the wrong testing, the actual result he got is wrong. So what are the two ways for us to ensure that this will not happen? First, auditor failed in recognizing exceptions. So the auditors, they need to be able to recognize the exception. This is the reason why this happened. The auditor, they need to avoid that in the future. And they use the inappropriate or ineffective auditing procedures. So next time they need to use the appropriate auditing procedures. These are the two reasons why they failed. Because they actually not selecting the right sample. No, they selected the right sample, but they failed to recognize the exceptions in them. And second, that use inappropriate tool. Now let's speak about another concept related to sampling, which is, we call it probabilistic sample selection. We need to ensure when we are doing selection for the sample that we are selecting a sample that is got the same chance. We are selecting items that got the same chances of being selected from the population. So if we are examining invoices, maybe some invoices are related to a global branch, and we can look at these invoices. The meaning of it that they don't have the same chance of being selected, and that may limit our testing. So we need to ensure all the items in the population, they have the same chances of being selected when we are doing the sample. Now let's go and understand what are the statistical sampling techniques. How can we select the sample? We have 4 statistical sampling techniques. Number 1, we have something called simple random sampling. Number 2, we have systematic sample selection. Number 3, we have probability proportional to size sampling. Number 4, we have stratified sample. So these are the different sampling techniques that we can use. So let's start with the first one. Simple random. Simple random, they say all the items of the population have equal chances of being selected. So this is a random sampling, right? You have the population and randomly you select the items that you need to do the testing. When do we use random sampling? When we don't care about the items we are looking at. All of them are the same. We don't care about the sequence. We don't care about the order. We just want to do a random way and select the items in the population we are examining. The second way for us to do sampling is doing systematic sample selection. So every 1, 2, 3, 4 we select sample. 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 we select sample. 8, 9, 10, 10 we select sample. So this is called systematic sample based on interval. Every 4 invoices we select 1 invoice. When do we use statistical sampling? We use it when we care about the order. We are examining if the individual is approving the invoices over 6 months. So in that way, every 20, 70, 80 invoices, we select 1 invoice to ensure that actually they are being approved. And this is where we are trying to look over time. Is this process is being done and the supervision is done and the approval is done? So this is where we look at it over time. Also, there's another way to do select sampling, which is called proportional probability proportional to size. And here we are interested in ensuring every dollars got the same chances of being selected. So with this, the way we do it is the following. We look at the population and we say, well, we have so many invoices. However, the total number of invoices that we have for this period is actually 5,000. We want to ensure that every 4 invoices, no, we are not speaking about number of invoices, we are speaking about the dollar amount. So we want to say every time the organization processes $1,200, $1,250 worth of invoices, we need to ensure that they are following the right procedure. So we are not interested in the number of invoices, we are interested in the dollar amount. So if the focus is on the dollar amount, we look at what? We look at probability proportion to size. So the way we do it, we say 5,000 over 4, because we are interested in selecting 4 samples, that will give me 1,250. Then I say 80, 80, still I didn't reach. 70, 70 plus 80, 150. Then I have 550, 640. Oh, now 2,240. Now at this point, I actually have reached to the 1,250, so that way I will select this invoice. So I will select the invoice that will make me reach to the number that I need to do this testing. The same, I continue. I reach 4,020. Now I reach to the invoice that I need to select. I reach 4,730. Now I reach the invoice that I need to select. So in that way, based on the dollar amount, I will be able to select the sample that I need. The final one is stratified sampling. With stratified sampling, we call it like classified sampling. So if we have different individuals in the population, so if we go to a school and we have different students who are from Asia, who are from Arab country, who are from Europe, we can do random sampling. Why? Because maybe randomly we get them all from Asia. So what we will do, we will go classify them. We say, okay, we want all the Asian students to be together, or the Arabic students, or the European students, and after that we select sample from each one of them. So in that way we classify them in different groups, and then we select the sample from them to ensure that our sample is actually representative of the population. Another technique we can use when we are speaking about sampling, we can use non-sampling, non-statistical sampling, which is direct. We have 3 ways for us to do it. We have direct sample selection, we have block sample selection, and we have varied sample selection. Let's start with the first one, direct sample selection. If you know where are the mistakes, if you know that the mistakes are actually happening in this division, or happening in this time period, or you know happening because of certain condition, or happening in larger amount, you can go directly and select this sample. This is what we say. If you as an auditor, you have understanding of the operation, you go and select the sample. That will help you achieve your goals related to the audit. Another way of doing it is we call it selecting a block sample, which is select a number of items in a sequence. Auditor must use several blocks to ensure it's representative. So we say in the year, we will select the month of May because maybe it's the summer, they are not gonna be actually working as hard as in the winter, or we select the month of December because it's the end of the year, not everyone in the office is actually focusing because it's the end of the year, everyone trying to celebrate. So we can select a block sample and we say, this block sample is representing how everything is happening in this month, because we believe most likely the issues or the error or the mistakes they are happening in that period. Finally, we can use something called Haphazard sample selection, which is selection of an item without any conclusive biases on the part of the auditor. So for you as an auditor, if you don't have a really understanding, but you are interested in ensuring that the hiring process done in the right way, you are not interested in the hiring process 2 years ago, you are interested in the hiring process in the last couple of months. So what you do, you select the last month and you say, let's test the hiring process in the last month, because you are most interested in the recent compliance with the policy and the procedures related to hiring compared to looking at what happened before. So these are the different methods we use related to statistical sampling and related to what? Related to non-statistical sampling. Now let's discuss the audit testing. So inside your audit, you are going to be testing different things. The first thing you are going to be doing compliance testing to test the effectiveness of the internal controls. The second thing, you will be doing substantive testing to test actual errors in the transactions. And sometimes you will be doing something called balance sheet testing. Sometimes if you are doing financial testing to ensure that actually the information that we have on the balance sheets are correct. And sometimes we do different testing together. So let's start with the first one. If we are doing compliance testing, what are the issues that you need to address? With compliance testing, the first question you need to ask, is fraud expected? If we expect that there is a fraud, we need to do completely different testing. And what is this testing? If we think there is a fraud, we need to go and do discover sampling. What is discover sampling? Discover sampling is testing the likelihood of finding at least one deviation. We are looking at discovery sampling, at least we want to catch one transaction with a fraud. So most likely we test 70, 80, 90% of the population to ensure that there is no fraud. If we find one transaction, fraudulent transaction, one invoice not approved, we need to stop and say, well, there's a fraud happening. So this is, we call it discovery sampling. If we believe fraud is not expected, now we ask ourselves, have we audited this function before? Do we know from experience that we are expecting large number of errors or small number of errors? Large number of mistakes or small? So if we believe we are expecting a low error rate, if we expect low error rate, why are we going to do a lot of testing? Because we know for the last 5 years we audit this function and everything is working as they should, they are doing everything as it should. So in that way everything is okay. So what we do, rather than going and doing the actual testing, we go and do something called stop and go testing. So what's stop and go testing? Stop and go, we look at the population and they say here the error rate that they should not exceed is 12%. So we say, great, I will select a sample, small sample. See, this is why they call it stop and go. We select a small sample. I look at the small sample and I say it's 10%. Okay, it looks like we have for one error. One error out of 5 is 20%. So the meaning of the error that we have is more than the error that's accepted. So in that way, what we need to do, we need to go. We can't stop our testing because we need, let's expand it a little bit. Let's see if this error is actually happening on a larger sample. So we expand our sample and we look at everything. It looks like the error is 10%, is less than the acceptable level. So in that way, it's okay. In that way, we stop. Stop and go sampling will help you in reducing your testings in the area where you don't expect so much error. So again, based on our discussion, if we are expecting there's a fraud, we go with discover sampling. If we expect there's no fraud, but we expect actually low error rate, we go with stop and go. If we are not sure, we go with what? With attribute sampling. What is attribute sampling? Attribute sampling is a statistical method used to estimate the proportion rate of occurrence of characteristics in a population. We want to see these transactions that we are going to examine. Do they have any of these attributes? These attributes will tell us that actually we have issues related to the internal control. So let's discuss a simple internal control. Let's say that your organization signed an agreement with the vendor to provide them with 10 units and each unit will cost 1,000. Now the vendor was trying to trick you. So what he did, they sent 12 units and each one is costing 1,000 and he sent you an invoice for 12,000 and actually you paid. How this happened? Because actually your organization relied on the receiving report and they made the payment without looking at the purchase order. What about if the vendor on the other hand sent you 8 units and each unit is costing 1,200, and he sent you an invoice exactly for 10,000 and you paid. What happened here? Your organization relied on the purchase order, not the receiving report. So this is why we create what we call attribute testing. We need to do testing to ensure that any of these attributes are not happening in the sample we will select, which is we need to ensure only approved order they have been paid. We need to ensure only product that we ordered we received, and only product we ordered we paid for. So we selected the sample, which is the last 6 months of invoices that we have, and then we say these are the attributes we are looking for. If any of these attributes we have in any of the samples we select, we consider this is a deviation. We consider this a weakness in the internal control, which is if we have purchase order with no approval, if we have any receiving report not matching the purchase order, or if we have any purchase order not matching the invoice. This is the way of conducting attribute testing. Any of these attributes in our sample will represent a weaknesses. Based on that, we can assess if the internal control working or not working. Now, let's move on to the next section, which is substantive testing. With substantive testing, we are trying to test the actual transactions. So the first question we ask here, is the book's value of the population is available? Do we know the total sales? Sometimes we have all the sales ordered, but do we know the total sales? If the answer is no, we don't, we go and use variable sampling. So we are gonna test the invoices to ensure they are as they should. They are not more, they are not less than they should. We do variable testing. If we believe the invoices, yes, we have the total number of invoices, we know exactly the total. So we ask another question. Do we expect a difference? Are we expecting that there is a difference in the invoices? If we don't expect a difference, we use monetary unit sampling, which is probability proportion to size. We try to do the testing and we select the sample based on the dollar amount and we do the testing. If we believe, yes, we expect differences. What's the meaning differences? We expect how much is recorded is really different than how much it should be. So in that way, we need to understand, are these differences related to what? We can use something called mean per unit to see what is the average of these items, if they are actually in the same range, and in that way we see, do we have something different than that? Or we use difference, or we use ratio estimates. So we use difference estimates or ratio estimates. Difference estimate, if we believe a portion of the sample that we are going to select actually because of certain process, because of certain individuals is creating a difference, we need to see this difference, is it significant or not, to make the total amount material, to see if the total amount is causing it to be material misstatement or not. And the same thing with ratio. If, and let's say your organization is charging, for example, 1% additional fees on certain processes, and if one of the division forget to charge this 1% fee, so that will create ratio estimate. So that way we need to go to that division and say, this 1% that they didn't charge, is it significant enough to render the total amount materially misstated or not? So these are the kind of testing we do. So again, if we have the book value, we will go and ask the question, do we expect difference? If yes, we go with MPU difference and ratio estimates. If no, we go with material unit sampling. And if we don't have actually the book value, we select variable testing. Now let's discuss another issues related to sampling. Here we are not speaking about sampling, we are speaking about what kind of control charts we can use to be able to get understanding of the errors and mistakes that's happening in the operation. They say control charts are very important because it will show you exactly any deviation. However, control charts will not tell you the reason of the deviation. So these are the disadvantages of control charts. Now with control charts, we have different charts. We have what we call P chart, which is showing you the percentage of deviations. How many out of the items that we have, let's say 20, 30, 1%, we have deviations in the items what we are processing. So this we call it P chart. We have C chart, which show you defects per item. For each one of the items that we have defects, do we have 7 defects, 3 defects, 1 defect in it? It will show you how many defects we have per item. We have the R chart, which is showing you the range of variation. So in that way, let's say we are speaking about a napkin box, and inside the napkin box we are expecting 400 napkins. Now, sometimes because of the machines, they can have 390 napkins. Sometimes they can have 405 napkins. This is what we call the range. It will go from 390 napkins to 405 napkins. So this is what we call the R chart. And sometimes we are interested in the X bar chart, which is the mean of variation. The same thing if we look at the napkins. We are looking at what is the difference in these napkins. What is the mean for these napkins? So the mean for these napkins, let's say in our sample that we selected is about 402. So based on all the items that we are looking at, 402, this is approximately the average. What are the napkins that we have in the process? To be able to use this in a visual way, for us to be able to understand it, we can use different techniques. For us to be able to assess the operation, we can use different methods. What are these methods? Number one, benchmarking. Benchmarking is a very interesting tool for you to be able to say, what are the processes that we have in place inside the organization? And how can we look at other organizations and learn from them to be able to improve? The first important task in benchmarking is what? It's not to start the benchmarking. It's not to look at who's best in doing the best practices. Is to assess what is the process that you want to benchmark. Once you assess the process that you want to benchmark, the second step after that is to say, this process that we want to benchmark, which organization they are doing the best practices in this process. Are we going to do benchmark based on the service itself, or are we going to do benchmark based on the same industry, or are we going to do benchmark based on the product? What are we actually benchmarking? And then after we select these best class, and after that we are benchmarking according to them, we need to assemble our team. We need to identify what is happening currently in our operation. We need to identify the gap between what we are doing and what we should be doing. And then we need to identify what are the things that we need to change to be able to do the best practices. And in that way, we are going to be leading in this industry. The second thing, when you are doing any kind of assessment, we need to look at the cost-benefit analysis. If we are going to implement this internal control to improve the operation, to reduce the deviations, to improve internal controls, how much is the cost and how much is the benefit? Assessing that will help you, because sometimes, if you see the cost is high compared to the benefit, you just leave the deviation because it's going to be costly for us to fix them. Another way, we look at the charts. Some charts can give me a very important information, like Berto diagram. Berto diagram will be able to give you something which is very interesting. We call it 80-20. They say 80% of the issues and the deviations that you have is because of 20% of the issues you have inside your operation. How interesting. So if we solve these 20% of the issues that we have, we will not have these 80% of the problems as a result. So using these charts will highlight for you what are the key critical issues that you can solve to be able to reduce 80% of the errors and deviations that you have in your operation. Another chart that we use as auditor, we call it histogram. And histogram is a very important chart to show you the frequency. With histogram, we are looking at which item is more frequent in our operation, so in that way we can address why it's happening and we can resolve the issue. And finally, we can use at something called fishbone diagrams. Fishbone diagrams is something we use for analyzing the root cause. We know that this issue is happening because of different reasons, and we want to understand for each one of these reasons why this is happening. So we look at the reasons that causing this reason to happen, and then look at the reason that causing that reason to happen. This is where we go with fishbone diagram to be able to identify the root cause that causing the issues to happen, and we eliminate it from source. So with that, we discussed different issues here. We discussed the sampling process, we discussed the control chart techniques, and we discussed the tools that you can use as an auditor to identify and understand the operation to be able to ensure internal controls are working effectively and the transactions are processed in the right way.